The truth will set you free, but first, it will piss you off. Sometimes, when we think we're enhancing something, we are just distorting it. When doing research, everyone wants to discover something special. Everyone wants to discover something interesting. In Carl Sagan's baloney detection kit are a number of critical steps towards vetting a discovery yourself. Since the experiment I'm about to duplicate tends to refute the claims of someone who has chosen not to examine their own work more closely, I'm going to leave the source of this experiment anonymous. I will, however, state quite clearly that I thought they had a very interesting idea. I thought it was really intriguing, or I would not have wasted any time looking further at it. I wanted to use this method myself if it was of value. On the other hand, I have seen others do similar experiments, not only with sound, but also with images, and the effects are much the same, strangely enough. Now we must examine the riddle of science.
The riddle of steel.
Yes.
No, the riddle of science. Although in context they're actually very much the same. And to extend the movie reference, the answer is never stated directly in the movie, and both answers given in the movie are wrong. If you do something interesting in science, others will build upon your work. If you share your methods, then they know how to approach the problem, and they know how to duplicate your experiment. This can be a blessing or a curse. The methods of science are indeed the only things you can trust to parallel the movie. That's not the only answer. The application of imagination can certainly bring you to places science cannot, but that is perilous, and that is not the answer at all. The riddle of science, if you will, is accepting responsibility for your own imagination and working to demonstrate your imagination has produced a meaningful and repeatable answer to the problem. Dr. Sagan appeals that you question your own work relentlessly, for if you fail to do so, others surely will. But isn't it better to discover for yourself that your idea is flawed? If your idea is deeply flawed, is it really better to have someone else debunk it for you? Or would it be better for you to vet the idea more thoroughly yourself, discover the flaws yourself, and maybe realize that it needed more refinement before being shared in the first place? The riddle of science forces us to improve continually, to up our game, while at the same time sharing and collaborating for the ultimate benefit of everyone. In the original experiment, it was suggested this segment of audio resembling the sound of wind on the microphone was possibly, in reality, infrasonic communication between Sasquatch. This caught my attention because I had at least 2 experiences during summer 2020 where there were apparently coordinated events with no discernible audio cues to connect them. I have been working on an infrasound sensor because regular audio recording devices do not function well below normal acoustic ranges. They typically strongly attenuate frequencies below 20 Hz. So I watched the video. I thought through the experiment, applying my experience as an engineer, and just in my thought experiment, I found a terribly unfortunate result that I will be demonstrating here shortly. And the experiment will demonstrate what I believe to be true. I suggested a control experiment to demonstrate the effect I'm about to show you. In effect, I was imploring that person to do this experiment himself to debunk his own work, which would be so much more graceful. Instead, there was a refutation of why such a simple experiment was not even necessary. And that's a sad response. So, let's conduct a simple experiment. The assertion was that wind on the microphone was actually linguistic communication in the infrasound frequency range. I realized the methods used were merely distorting noise in a selected way. I expected that if the same process was applied to actual wind on a microphone, that the same result would be observed. Then I need to ask, if it is my own breath on a microphone producing the same effect? Is Sasquatch communicating with me using infrasound in my own breath? Or is it more likely that I have simply distorted the sound in an amusing way that ends up producing the effects that trick our brains into hearing things that might potentially be phonemes? Understand, I had not yet actually tried to conduct the experiment. I just thought, based on years of experience as an engineer trying to extract data from noisy signals in sound and in other sorts of media, designing filters and observing the results, often visualizing the results with sound, sometimes visualizing the results on a computer screen. So, here's the actual experiment. So here we have a brief audio file, 3.5 seconds long, where I breathe on the microphone. Let's just hear what it sounds like. Okay. Now, I'm going to change this to the spectrogram. And I'm going to leave it in a linear scale, just like he did, even though the reality is we hear things in octaves. We don't really hear things on a linear frequency scale. I am now going to apply the filter, keeping only frequencies below 50 Hertz, just as he did. Now I'm going to repeat this filter a couple times to clean out all of that higher frequency audible stuff. That might be one too far. That sounds scary. Now, this was the stage at which we changed the pitch. So we bring the infrasound up into a more audible range. Let's try that. That's not quite the same effect. I'm going to repeat that. There we go. Now, I had some quiet early in the recording, so I can select that now as a standard for the noise reduction filter. Now I'm going to select the entire file and apply the noise reduction filter based on that early sound. I'm going to do this as he did a few times, and I'm going to eliminate all that original noise. Now, what does this sound like? Sounds pretty much the same as that experiment. Now, he had Sasquatch communicating in infrasound. Is Sasquatch communicating to me using infrasound in my own breath? Or have I simply distorted the sound to the point that there are these tricky little distortions that sound kind of almost like phonemes? There could be language in that. Or, well, probably not. Now, before I mentioned people doing this with images. In particular, I'm thinking about images from Mars. These images were recorded in orbit of Mars, sent back to NASA, re-rendered. Then they were compressed as JPEG and put out on the internet, where people downloaded them, and then they tried all sorts of image enhancement software to discover the alien civilizations on Mars. And in fact, they found them. Or, well, actually, they found MPEG compression artifacts that you can then amplify and discover things that are on a grid, just like the MPEG compression algorithm operates on a grid. Just like Scott Carpenter saw MPEG compression algorithms appearing in the shadow and light behind him as the image receded as he walked away. It wasn't a strange, mysterious entity. It was just MPEG compression artifacts. So there's no civilization on Mars. There aren't ghostly creatures materializing from nowhere behind Scott Carpenter while he's not looking. And Sasquatch is not communicating with me using infrasound from my own breath. I am the curious cryptid, and I'd really love to find people who have interesting and meaningful discoveries. I am going to still be looking for infrasound, and possibly infrasound in communication. Unfortunately, this wasn't the right path.